Hey, finance folk! Welcome back to the EU Finance Podcast. My name is Aidas Palubinskas, and I'm tanned, rested, and ready to learn some more about EU finance. Humble brag alert, I'm pretty good with digital stuff and not entirely stupid about finance. It's fair to say I do all of my finance stuff online. That said, when I heard the term data hub in reference to digital finance, I could only conjure up visions of space stations and people floating about wearing shiny metallic jumpsuits, hence the need for this pod. Digital finance is the term used to describe the impact of new technologies on the financial services industry. It includes a variety of products, applications, processes, and business models that have transformed the old-fashioned way of providing banking and financial services. In September 2020, the European Commission adopted the Digital Finance Strategy to foster a more competitive and innovative European financial sector. The Digital Finance Platform is part of this effort to support innovation in finance and build a true single market for digital financial services. I've asked the EU Commission's foremost expert on the Digital Finance Platform, Guedel of DG FISMA, to come and help me understand the latest innovation on the platform, the Data Hub. So, put on my imaginary spacesuits and let's spin this thing up. Welcome, Alice. Thank you so much for agreeing to come to the podcast and to enlighten me about the Data Hub.
Thank you for inviting me.
Happy to. Okay. Before we actually get to the Data Hub, I think I need a little bit of background because if I understand correctly, the Data Hub is part of the Digital Finance Platform, correct?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, good. So if you could, before we get to the nuts and bolts, if you could give me a little bit of background on what is the Digital Finance Platform?
The Digital Finance Platform is a collaborative space for fintechs and regulators to work together and build closer relationships. Before I move forward, I'll explain maybe what I mean by fintechs and what I mean by regulators.
Okay.
Fintechs is a narrow definition. What I mean is innovative companies, which are startups and incumbents. I use the term fintechs to make it easier throughout the podcast.
Sure.
And then regulators is national authorities specialized in financial services. But I'll stick to regulators for the rest of the podcast. This digital finance platform is part of a strategy which is called the Digital Finance Strategy and was adopted by the Commission in September 2020. And in this strategy, the objective is to encourage innovation throughout digital finance services throughout the European Union. This platform is part of the effort to bring fintechs and regulators closer together to encourage innovation. To come back on the platform, what it offers are different kind of features and content that can be useful for the users, which are fintechs and regulators. On the platform, you can find, for example, a mapping of all the fintechs in the European Union. You can also find a feature on cross-border services, which is when a fintech develops nationally, when it comes to expanding to another member state, it can be sometimes very challenging. Of course, because of culture and business-wise, it can be complicated, but also on the regulatory standpoint. So the objective of this cross-border service is to bring fintechs closer to regulators in advance before the expansion so that they can test the environment in the local area they want to expand. On the platform, you can also find, for example, the events happening in fintech in the EU or the latest news on financial regulation or digital finance services. So this was what I just presented was part of the first phase of development of the digital finance platform. But now there's a second phase that is starting, and the objective is to develop a new data hub.
Okay, well, you're getting ahead of me. And I have to earn my money. I have to ask the questions. But just coming back to the digital finance platform, just so that I understand it. So basically what it is the EU is providing a service to both member states and importantly to the fintechs that are developing the new cool things that we use in our everyday lives in banking, investment, savings, whatever, right? Am I right?
Exactly.
Okay.
That's exactly right.
Okay, good. Okay, so you've already mentioned the Data Hub. I imagined the Data Hub as something really super spacey. So you're going to have to, 2001: A Space Odyssey sort of thing. So if you could explain to me, what is the Data Hub?
Yes, in fact, it can seem a bit abstract like this, so I'll try to make things a bit more concrete. So the Data Hub is a feature that would allow fintechs to have access to synthetic supervisory data. So basically, this would help the fintechs get data to develop new products and also train artificial intelligence and machine learning models. Of course, in order for this to work, we need the regulators to provide the data, and we need the fintechs to be able to access this data to use it for their new products. And so the way it would work is that we would be talking with regulators to explain to them what kind of data is needed from the market and understand if they would be willing to provide this data. If they are willing to provide the data and commit to the Data Hub, they would upload the synthetic data sets on the Data Hub. And then the fintechs would be able to have access to a list of data sets available, and they could request access to the data sets they are interested in. Of course, we will not grant access to any fintech. They would have to fill in a form explaining for which use case they need the data and the purpose of the data. And the fintechs, once they download the data, will not be allowed to share the data externally nor to sell it.
Cool. So basically, what you're saying is that the EU is protecting the people that are behind the data, and this is sort of like a foremost. Not need, but that's what the Commission wants to do, is wants to protect the people that have generated this data so that nobody can identify them, but so that the data is still useful for fintechs to innovate.
Exactly.
Got it.
And of course, I'm completely aware, and we at the Commission are aware that this data is extremely sensitive, and the data that regulators hold are usually not accessible. But the fact that we were able to find a solution of transforming the data in a synthetic way is a way of protecting all the data in terms of privacy and confidentiality, with the advantage of using the characteristics and the results of it.
Got it.
This Data Hub is also part of a European strategy, which is the European Data Strategy. And in this strategy that was adopted by the Commission, the objective is for the EU to commit to boosting the development of trustworthy data sharing systems. And one of the measures that is part of it is to facilitate the reuse of certain public data that cannot be made available as open data. So this is why the Data Hub is certainly a sensitive project, but it's also a very innovative one in the sense that it hasn't been done before.
But the sensitivity is being taken care of by the synthesization of the data, so that people's personal data is not accessible to anybody that's using this Data Hub.
Exactly. So maybe now I could explain a bit more what synthetic data is.
Sure.
Synthetic data is artificial data that is generated from the original data and that is trained to reproduce and to mimic the original data. So the reason why this technology of synthesizing data is so valuable is because it allows supervisors to participate in this Data Hub initiative, but without taking any privacy or confidentiality risks. What's so specific about the Data Hub and the synthetic data is that the original data that regulators hold, will never leave the premises of the regulator. The synthesization software will be installed on the servers of the regulator, and only synthetic data will leave the premises of the regulator.
Got it.
And so to dig a bit more into this technology that is very new and still in progress, we decided to do a pilot with the Central Bank of Spain in summer 2022. In this pilot, the Bank of Spain selected a specific data set that they wanted to test. And so they went through the synthesization of the data during a whole summer. And the results were actually very positive. It was challenging because the technology is complicated, because it also depends on the quality of the data that is fed into the software. But then the results were sufficiently convincing and positive for us to decide to continue wanting to use this technology for the Data Hub.
Okay, well, I think you've clearly done your homework, and you guys have made it pretty much foolproof that personal data isn't going to get out. So let's move on to something that I find absolutely interesting. What data will be available to the people that are using the Data Hub?
The data that will be available is coming from the insights we've received from fintechs. So before we started building the Data Hub and going to this big project, the first thing we did is that we interviewed fintechs directly to understand exactly what they need. It's clear enough that there's demand from the market to have access to supervisory data, but then there is so much data that we need to choose which data is valuable for them. So by interviewing the fintechs, we got the opportunity to understand specifically which data sets and even which variables they wanted to have access to. So unfortunately, I cannot give the results because they are confidential, but at least now we have a better idea of what is required from the market. And so when we talk to regulators and discuss eventually their participation in the Data Hub, we can tell them, okay, this is the data that fintechs are looking for. Do you have this data and are you willing to share it?
Got it. Okay. Just for clarification, I guess, this question, just so that I really get it. Who is involved in the Data Hub?
This is a very good question. And it's also important to be aware of who is involved because there are many entities involved. So the Data Hub project is led by DG FISMA, which is the directorate in charge of finance subjects at the European Commission. And within this DG, there's a digital finance team in which I'm part of, and that is leading the project. We are also collaborating with the European supervisory authorities, EIOPA, ESMA, and EBA. And we particularly discussed with them in the beginning to understand if this project was realistic and also what would be the conditions for this Data Hub to work. We also work with regulators because we need regulators to provide the data. So we have a group of regulators we're working with and who are...
When you say regulators, you're talking about the member state authorities that regulate, right?
Yes,
okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so when we talk to regulators, we have to know if they are willing to provide the data. So there's this group of regulators. And then on the other side, we're also working with fintechs because in the beginning, they needed to give us feedback on what they wanted to have access to. And then we're also working with the Joint Research Center of the Commission, JRC, that will be testing the data synthesization software to understand the methodology they use and also to make sure all the privacy and confidentiality requirements are respected. And last but not least, we are working with an external contractor that is providing the synthesization software that regulators will use to synthesize the data.
Okay. I think this is probably going to be my last question, but it's a question. It's usually my last question for every subject. And I usually don't get a satisfactory answer because oftentimes if we're talking about legislation, then of course it's in the hands of the council and of the parliament. I think maybe in this case, I might get a more satisfactory answer. And the basic question is, when is this going to happen? When is this going to go live? When are we going to see the results of it? So what are the latest updates on the Data Hub, and when is this thing going to be, packaged, slapped on the bottom, and put out into the wild?
The Data Hub initiative started in March 2023. This is when we started having the interviews with all the fintechs. We started having the discussions with the regulators. And so in parallel of this, we were also working with an external contractor that is still building the infrastructure of the Data Hub. To make things clear, the Data Hub will be built on top of the digital finance platform, and it is actually now ready and launched on the platform. And this is the latest update, is that on the infrastructure side, it's out. And then on the regulatory side, we are still in discussions with the regulators, and some have already started the synthesization process. So this will probably be the kind of the next phase of the Data Hub, which is to have the synthesized data sets published on the Data Hub. And this, we're expecting it to happen by the end of this year and early next year.
Wow. Okay. So it sounds like it's already in the wild. I mean, it exists. You've already tested it. You've made sure that it's safeguarding people's privacy. And now you're just expanding the project, as it were, and opening it up to more regulators and more fintechs, right?
Exactly.
Oh, that's a very satisfying answer. It means that this isn't a future thing. The future is now.
Yes, it's happening.
Okay, well, I'm really glad that I got a very satisfying answer to end our episode. Alice, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for talking about the Data Hub and about the digital finance platform.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, here's my takeaway on this. The EU's digital finance strategy sets out how Europe can support the digital transformation of finance in the coming years, while regulating its risks. Embracing digital finance will unleash European innovation and create opportunities to develop better financial products for us regular folk. It unlocks new ways of channeling funding to EU businesses, and in particular to small and medium enterprises. Boosting digital finance will support Europe's economic recovery strategy and the broader economic transformation. It is going to open new channels to mobilize funding in support of the Green Deal and the new industrial strategy for Europe. As digital finance accelerates cross-border operations, it will also enhance financial market integration in the banking union and, my favorite, the capital markets union, and thereby strengthen Europe's economic and monetary union. That's good for everyone. The digital finance platform and the Data Hub are tools within this digital finance strategy that are creating the environment where the industry, be it startups or legacy institutions, can build the products you and I are going to be using to save, spend, and invest, all without going to a brick and mortar. That's all for today. As always, like and subscribe. Tell your family, tell your friends. Until next time, bye.